Welcome to Terrifying Tales, the channel dedicated to bringing you original horror stories. Please support the channel by hitting the like button or leaving a comment. And please consider subscribing to the channel by hitting the subscribe button on the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Prefer to read it yourself? A written version of the story is available to read on Substack, and the link's in the description. Surveying the Line by C.J. Knight. People knew it only as the Hollow. Maps did not name it. Tucked between two ridgelines of broken granite, its trees leaned at odd angles, and shadows never left. Henry Martin was a man in his late 20s, running from tragedy. His wife Susan died the previous winter. Henry was still young enough to remarry, and his blue eyes were something many women were known to get lost in. But Henry only loved one woman, and he could no longer hold her. So Henry ran, and didn't stop until June 1866, where he found himself the new surveyor of the Central Pacific Railroad. One morning late in that first month, Henry was glancing over the charts. His next area to survey was the Hollow. He privately believed they should bypass the Hollow completely, but it would be pointless to express that opinion. Nothing would stop the railroad. It would cross the Sierras, no matter the obstacles in front of it. Henry chose two assistants, and they set out with level and chains toward the Hollow. His chosen assistants were the two men he'd grown closest with in his short time on the railroad, Joshua Marsh and Edward Keane. Joshua was an orphan who was probably too young to be working for the railroad. He was the owner of a nasty temper, which didn't match his fragile frame. On top of his head was always the same weathered cap, pulled down to the left in a futile attempt to hide the burn scars covering that side of his face. Joshua often sported a black eye after picking a fight he shouldn't have. Henry supposed the anger came from having to fight his entire life just to live, with no one looking out for him. Henry decided he would do his best to look out for Joshua while he worked the railroad. If Joshua talked too much, then Edward was the opposite. A man of very few words, who was as comfortable as Henry to sit in complete silence. Edward looked older than he was and enjoyed the bottle. Henry heard the stories. Edward's wife and sons were murdered when someone broke into their home while he was away. He supposed Edward also knew of the loss of his own wife, yet the men never spoke of their tragedies to each other. Instead, they shared a silent knowledge that perhaps they, and only they, knew what it was like to lose those you loved, and with it, everything you cared about. So together on that June morning, the three men set out. Behind them, Chinese labourers and Irish graders would follow in time. But for now, they'd be on their own. The railway demanded progress. The walk to the Hollow went without incident. Edward sipping his bottle in silence, Joshua speaking without rest, twirling his knife from hand to hand, and Henry scanning the horizon for trouble. His pistol at his side was more for comfort than action. If they ran into trouble, he doubted the pistol would protect them. He never allowed himself to relax until he spotted the Hollow. Two words ran through his mind as he surveyed the shadow-filled ravine. Still and silence. The thick grass muffled even the sound of their footfalls as they entered. The trees arched forth from the slopes, dead limbs reaching out as if begging to be dragged to freedom. Joshua let out a long whistle. "Will you look at this?" He nudged the carcass of a coyote with his boot. Its ribs were visible beneath the shaggy hide. The nudge disturbed the cloud of flies covering its side. Henry's eyes searched for the sun that the hollow denied entry. Coyotes die of mange and hunger all the time out here. "Not standing up," Joshua muttered. The carcass leaned upright against the trunk of a tree, jaw fixed in a grimace. Henry didn't respond, but he bent to inspect the coyote. Its paws were bound in twine and knotted in a curious loop he'd not seen before. The sight forced a rising cold in his gut. Edward spoke for the first time all day. "We're wasting daylight. Let's set the points and be done with this place." The unease in Edward's voice wasn't lost on Henry. They began their work in tense silence. None of the men admitted it, but they all wanted to be gone from the hollow. Henry sighted ahead to where the grade would descend a slope studded with boulders and dead trees. As he raised his level to check bearing, a blur of movement between the trees and his periphery caught his attention. A gaunt shape moving with purpose. Then more followed. Coyotes. Their hides as ragged as the corpse they encountered. But unlike that one, their eyes were bright. Too bright for the gloom of the hollow. Henry lowered his level, and his fingers gripped the hilt of his pistol. His pulse quickened and hammered in his ears. The coyotes seemed to understand the implication of Henry's hand on the pistol and held their ground. "All right," Henry said. "Next station." The men advanced down slope. Henry tried to dismiss what he'd seen, but every time he glanced back, the coyotes were there. Never advancing, never retreating, just watching. The men reached a clearing marked by a granite outcrop. Joshua and Edward set the tripod and chain. Henry pulled the chain taut toward the far side of the clearing. The grass parted around his boots, releasing a stench of death that covered him like fog. He pulled himself up onto a nearby rock in an effort to find fresh air. There was a soft rustle in the grass behind him. When he turned, he found himself facing a coyote, not holding back like the others. This one stood only a few feet away. It was larger than any coyote Henry had ever seen. It stood the size of a wolf, fur covered in mud and burrs. Henry's throat tightened as he looked into its eyes. They weren't the eyes of a coyote. It possessed the eyes of a man. Two black coals encircled in white. They fixed on Henry with what he could only describe as undiluted hatred. Henry's breath held as the coyote spoke. The voice was not the growl of a coyote. It was a whispered voice, somewhere between human and beast. A rasp of earth and wind. "The hollow is not your place. Leave or die." Henry fell backwards from the rock. The chain dropped from his hand. "Are you all right, Henry?" Edward asked. The coyote slipped back into the trees. Henry was trembling as Joshua came to him. "Something spoke to me." Joshua eyed the trees nervously, knife in hand. "Was it an Indian?" Edward joined them. Henry shook his head. "No. It was a coyote." Joshua and Edward stared at him for a moment. Doubt covered Joshua's face, but Edward seemed less sure. "Maybe we should head back to the railroad." "No. Henry said. "We finished the survey." He was already convincing himself that he imagined the whole thing. Darkness closed in quickly in the hollow, forcing the three men to make camp. In their canvas tent, Joshua was unusually quiet. The silence shared between Henry and Edward lacked its normal comfort. Instead, unease filled the silence. Just before midnight, the coyotes howled. After that, the voices joined in. "Joshua, help us! We're burning!" The shrill cries of a woman. Joshua trembled on his bedroll, hands firmly over his ears. "Don't run, you coward! You've killed us all!" "Henry?" He felt a tear roll down his cheek at hearing the unmistakable voice of Susan. "I've been so cold since you buried me alone in the ground. Come back to me. Why did you run?" Finally, the voices called for Edward. "Daddy, why did you go out drinking? They came and murdered us. Why weren't you here to protect us?" Edward snapped. "Shut up! You're not my son!" He rushed for the tent flap. Henry and Joshua grabbed at his arms. He broke free and rushed out into the night. Henry followed, pistol in hand. The darkness was suffocating. "Edward!" Silence. Yellow circles appeared in the dark, surrounding the tent. The eyes of the coyotes. "Edward!" This time, a chorus of howls met Henry's cry. Joshua pulled him back into the tent. The voices continued through the night. Neither Henry nor Joshua slept. Dawn finally broke, pale and cold. Henry pulled back the flap of the tent with the barrel of a pistol and saw it. Overnight, someone had erected an effigy 10 feet from the tent, a lattice of branches. Tied to the effigy, with the same knots of twine seen on the dead coyote, was the body of Edward. With a look of terror etched on his face, throat slashed open, congealed blood covered the front of his shirt. On the ground below the effigy was a symbol drawn in white ash. "It's time to leave," Henry said. Joshua rose beside him and witnessed the destruction of Edward for himself. "I'll start packing the gear." "Leave it." Henry put his hand on Joshua's shoulder. "We go now." A chorus of low growls rippled from the trees. A shape burst from the undergrowth. It was a coyote running on all fours. The beast crossed into the clearing and reared up on its hind legs. It shed fur like a man removes a coat. What stood now was neither coyote nor man. It stood naked except for strips of hide clinging to its shoulders. It wore the face of nightmares. The jaw of a coyote fused to the face of a man. One eye human, the other bright yellow. Its arms hung beside its body, too low. Sharp claws punctuated each arm. A pack of coyotes emerged from the tree line and edged to form a line with the creature. Henry lifted his pistol and aimed at the creature. The pistol shot echoed through the hollow. It had no effect. The bullet hit the creature in the chest and did nothing. With unbelievable speed, it lunged forward. Henry felt the wind leave his body as the creature tackled him to the ground. The creature pulled its claw back to strike. Joshua jumped onto the creature's back and drove his knife in. The creature slashed and tore through Josh's thigh, forcing him to the ground. Henry picked himself up. "Run!" Joshua screamed. The creature stood over Joshua. Henry charged with everything he had. He slammed into the creature with every bit of force he could muster. The creature lost balance and fell. Joshua's leg was a mess. Henry knew he couldn't walk. He picked Joshua up and tossed him onto his back. Joshua screamed in agony at the sudden movement of his leg. Henry knew the man was frail, but he really was just a boy, light as a feather. The creature picked itself up from the ground. Henry turned to run. The coyotes blocked the way. Henry fired, causing them to scatter. Then he ran. Behind came the sound of the coyotes, the creature, and the voice of Susan. He didn't look back. Even light as he was, the weight of Joshua threatened to bring them both down. The footfalls behind were gaining ground. The end of the hollow was within sight. Henry found the will to keep going. As he cleared the edge of the hollow, the chasing footfalls ceased. Henry turned back to see the creature and the coyote pack standing at the hollow's edge. By the time Henry made it back to the railroad, Joshua had lost consciousness, but he was alive. The foreman demanded an explanation. Henry lied. He knew no one would believe the truth. There was an ancient claim over the hollow. That place was spoken for. The grading crews never advanced into the hollow. Within a week, the engineers declared a reroute over higher ground. The only reason recorded in the ledgers: ground unsuitable. When the rails stretched past the ridgeline, the hollow remained untouched. Henry left the railroad after that. He found somewhere else to run. This time he wasn't alone. Joshua went with him. Neither man ever spoke of that night, but in the quiet hours, when there isn't a breath of wind in the air, both men still hear the voices of the hollow calling to them.